Okay, hi everyone. It's about 7 p.m, so I think we're going to get going with our reading tonight. My name's Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press. Just a couple of notes before we get going, basically. So, on behalf of Carcanet, obviously, I want to thank you so much for being here. I know it's increasingly disturbing what's going on out there, so your support for poetry and for indie publishing is really appreciated right now, so thank you. Obviously, we're here to launch Rory Waterman's third Carcanet book, which is very exciting. Sweet Nothings is, here it is, in all its glory. It's got another gorgeous cover by our editor, Andrew, that we're really proud of. And if you're not familiar with Rory's book, this is his third Carcanet collection. If you're not familiar with his work, his two previous books were really amazingly received. They were both shortlisted for very prestigious awards, and they're both available on our website. So you should definitely visit the site and buy them if you're not familiar with the work. What's going to happen here is I am going to disappear any second. I'm going to hand over to the wonderful William Ivory, playwright and screenwriter. You may know his work. Nadine Dagenham and also Torvalin Dean is on there. So he's going to pop up, he's going to introduce Rory for us, and then Rory is going to read some of the poems. He'll also be screen sharing, so the poems should appear on your own screen. You should be able to read along with the reading. After we've heard a few poems, William is going to come back up on screen. We're going to have a couple of questions and a little chat. So if you guys could locate the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button there and you can enter some questions in there. That would be great. We'll have a little break. You guys can get yourselves a drink or run to the loo or whatever you need to do, and we'll hear a couple more poems, and then we'll have a discussion proper at the end between William and Rory. So before I disappear, the final thing I want to tell you about is the discount code. If you find where the chat is, I'm putting it in the chat box for you now. So it's got a link to the book page, and it's also got the discount code. If you can't find the chat, don't worry about it. You're also going to get this in an email tomorrow, and then there'll be another email coming. So you will be able to access the discount code and buy your own copy of the book sooner or later. So don't worry about that. So without further ado, I will go now and hand over to William Ivory.
Thank you. Right, am I on? I must be on. There you go. That's a great start. Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks everybody for being there. It's very weird this being on the other end of I think they call these webinars. Anyway, I'm going to sort of introduce Rory now, and then Rory's going to read for about 20 minutes or so. Then we'll have a couple of little questions, and then, as Jasmine said, a bit of a break, some more poems. But then at the end of that, I will chat to Rory. But you know, we'd like you to be firing questions in all the way through, if only to spare my embarrassment. And those of you who don't know Rory, he was born in Belfast in 1981, but he grew up in rural Lincolnshire. And anyone who stood next to him, as I have done at Notts County, on a cold November evening while he wears just a cap sleeve t-shirt, will be able to confirm that he is a tough Lincolnshire lad at heart. Okay, so let's get straight on with it, really. It's the most wonderful collection of poetry, and I'm just going to hand straight over to Rory and take it away, mate.
Hello. Right, so I need to share my screen. Bear with me, folks. I'm an idiot. Is that right? Are we there? No, we're not there, are we? Share screen. There we go. Sorry. And I'm not at the beginning. Well, thanks, Billy, and thanks, Jasmine. And thank you to everyone who's logged on. I'm extremely grateful, especially if you've bought the book. It was great to see Matthew Welton's launch last week, and we were going to launch our books together in Nottingham, but instead we've launched them a week apart, courtesy of Carcanet. So thanks, Carcanet, for making that happen. The book's in 2 sections, and both of equal length, and they're essentially self-contained sections. And while I think they're in the right order in which to read, I don't necessarily think they're in the right order in which to be presented as a reading. So I'm going to fly about a bit. And I'm beginning with a poem that I think of as a metaphor, really, for some of the collection's concerned preoccupations. It's the first poem in the second section, right in the middle of the volume, Where to Build. I never thought I'd have a home, but then I'd built one up from the bay, a shrub scrubbed cleft half hiding it, a plunging stream behind the grate, and locals pointed up or down to where I lived beside myself for years, with all I'd wanted most, building a greenhouse, annex, shelves, and made it all I knew to want, and drowned the voice that said, I don't, with all I'd always done for this, and grew tomatoes seed to light, and ate them happily every night, and fixed the leak that drew the rain, and fixed it when it sprung again. Well, I knew of rock across the bay, a skerry, green topped, curving round to out of sight behind near rock. But rain set in, the endless rain, and through the sheet of endless cloud a jet of sudden light cracked down across that further hunk of land, which glimmered ginger, and it stayed for seconds, minutes, hours, days, the whole life of my house away. I think the next poem is from a sequence of 4 called Had and Held, and I think it speaks for itself. Self-storage. It's 9 months since we crammed all we'd accrued from shells to shelving, pots to postcards, somewhere here, in case we worked it out. But where? He squints at the screen. Unit 211, 3rd corridor. You moving house? We pause the same pause. Yes, I say, something like that. We don't know where. She shoots a marital glance as if to say I've gone too far again, and curls a hand round her waist. Our neat black diamond, unusual enough, is off it now. So, pull the vans right up to the ledge. The doors slide over, he says, gliding one arm across the other. We never saw it coming. He's seen it before. Good luck. We smile and then offload our lives in ordered halves. I can't write that part down. It didn't happen. This desk proves otherwise. So they're the fun ones. Okay, when I was a late teen, Killing in the Name, the song that ends with "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me," repeated 20-something times in not particularly dulcet tones, was normally the song they play in rock clubs at the end of the night. And it always seemed a bit of an odd choice to me, because it's basically a sweary rant. And I've always wanted to get it in a poem as a kind of cheeky metaphor for the result of a final drunken dance of the night or something like that. And now I have done. And there was also a song version of this that I did with my friend Adam that I'm pretty proud of too. He wrote the music and it's unsuitably lovely, but I digress. Levers balls. Billy, Sir Billy, you've got your mic off mute. Cheers, sorry. Levers balls. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you. He had never danced to this before, like this, with a doe-eyed goth in docks. Now you were in luck, cheek to cheek and groin to groin. You kissed, then felt each other up behind the hall and waved her off when she got picked up by her mum. So, do you call, play cool? The next morning you called. Doing much? Nothing. I'm going town, wanna come? A few years passed. You both had bills to pay with new careers and a mortgaged duplex in Maidstone. So you went to Crete on a package holiday, the last before your first, though, if you'd known. You had your Game Boy Advance and Big Mother truckers to fill the long, long years. Her headphones fizzed. I won't do what you tell me. Motherfucker. Which might have been nice to share, but what now is? More years have gone, her parents too. You've moved to Gravesend for a post at Gravesend Heating and Lighting Solutions. The wedding snaps have improved with the sheen of impossible choices, impossible meetings, and peel a little from clip frames along the hall. Tonight, your lad has his college leavers ball and whispers sweet nothings in his girlfriend's ear. They're the sweetest nothings she'll ever hear. Okay, I wouldn't have written the next poem without encouragement from a friend and poet I admire a lot, who encouraged me to write about my childhood a bit. I wrote a few poems about that in my first book, and then I thought I'd said everything I wanted to say about it. So in my second book, I didn't about it at all. And I said this at a reading a couple of years ago, actually, and someone asked me about that, and she said, it's a shame you don't do that, because them's the ones I like, and now I have done. This poem's called Like Father, and it comes with a note under the title, started 2000, finished 2019, and that's true. I found some kind of mawkish notes from when I was about 17, and I decided to layer my current perspective on top of that one, effectively. Like Father. My daddy was Irish and famous. Well, sort of Irish and sort of famous, he said, and told the truth. He loved and he was loved and was a joker. And in his youth, he'd passed the 11 plus with such high marks they'd sent him to private school, plush lawns, straw hats. But then he'd felt oppressed by the Oxbridge conveyor. So that was that for years while he wrote in garrets and took real jobs. Porter on Jersey, bank clerk. He explored the world and then read English up at Leicester, then at Oxford, and won awards and found he was getting in print, but still worked summers at Leicester Station goods yard. Am I as bright as you, Daddy? Probably not. So it was hard not to pine for all he represented on access visits, and not to be beguiled. But I knew I wasn't as special, that I was an anxious child who liked to play with marbles on his own, while Mum cooked, watched EastEnders, tidied up, who teachers said should come out of his shell, who had a pup and made her his best friend, and got in trouble for daydreaming and caused too much of a fuss about his distant dad, who scrapped, who failed the 11 plus and went to a comprehensive where he learned never to try too hard, who knew his place was in the middle, who watched his lurch-drunk father jab at the face of a steadfast woman patently too good to stay with him. She didn't. Who wouldn't become a poet and scholar too, or much at all. He was too dumb. Who later found the custody hearing documents while helping his mother clear her musty attic. The affidavits of all his dad's ex-lovers, each emphatic that I'm sure the child's interests are best served by being kept from this abusive man, a drunk who bullied and hit me. His arrest statement from when my nan lost her front teeth. I hadn't been told the reason. Until then, I'd seen one short, partial report to which my father had clung. Mum had buried most retorts, and Nan was now in her functional little urn. and I was trying to be like him, a bit, in fewer and fewer ways, and started a poem. And this is it. Defences, Kirby Muxloe Castle. Excuse me, I need some tea. Defences. Crikey, you say, it's gorgeous. Across the moat, 2 hunks of unfinished battlement reflect, a bit like the butterfly prints we once did at school, the bottom halves faint and blemished. Let's walk it round. And never mind the scuppered Portaloo breaching by the bridge that was a drawbridge. The teams of mallards sifting wavelets don't. Then, when you see a moorhen padding the roots of an undercut willow, instinctive bird-brained head quantum leaping about on the stem of her neck, 10 balls of chick bunching and stretching behind as she pushes away to the safety of open water, you act as I once would have. Look, she's got 10. At Belfast Zoo, between goes on the toddler swing, I finger jabbed at a peacock stretching its fan. Duck! But I was 1 and can't remember this tale, which might be true. And 10 years later, a young ornithologist tied to the heart of his father, keen to impress somehow as we boated the Broad's long bends of Reedford River, blue, green, blue, I pointed out a preening crested grebe riding the ripples. He was half blind by then, a sudden genetic inconvenience, and couldn't see it and said he thought he could. A windmill stretched its X across the sky. Geese beat frantic along the water runway. He turned his head to show me I could show him. And that night when we'd moored beside the Swan, and after my bedtime, as I raced model hooks surreptitiously around my cabin, he punched his would-have-been wife in the eye, then went back to his scotch. I watched them through the crack he couldn't discern along the door jamb, and knew the truth, then how to doubt the truth, when he said, then when she said, that she'd slipped. The bitterness of justice never done. Dandelions are stitched down to the water where ramsons have flowered. I pick one and we taste. You bunch your nose to wrinkles, do you mean it? Then pounce for another bite. Lead me behind this blackthorn hedge. No, let me drive us home. And, well, this poem needs no introduction, but I know that someone who's logged on tonight was at my primary school and also remembers Mrs. Milson and Canon Rogers, who might sound like a character out of the Beano or maybe Viz, but he really existed. Maybe he still exists. Let's hope so. Genesis 6:15, Acts 26:5, Matthew 6:34. How big's a cubit? I don't believe it. It couldn't. I looked up from a half-crayoned boat of giraffes and such like at Mrs. Milson, who knew. You wouldn't, and you're not the first to think like that, she laughed. But when Canon Rogers, whose name I was too small to appreciate, next gave our school assembly, they singled me out to read. The tiny hall grew huge. I stalled on testify, Pharisee, which parts to stress. And then we had to sing. Kiss my ass, Lord, kiss my ass. The bigger boys behind me muttered, grinning. I gawped out at the wet, bright trees and grass. No flood in our world. Now I'm a world away, nursing another beer, a parent's age. So I'm going to pause the first part there and bring Mr. William Ivory.
Cheers, Rory.
Back to
life.
Sorry, Professor Dr. William Ivory. I do apologise.
Yeah. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Incidentally, we've got We got applause, Rory. There, look at that.
That's nice, isn't it? It's nice.
Lovely.
Only one person though. Only one person.
Well, that is nice. It's lovely. This is so weird. If folks want to, by the way, I'm going to say a few things now. I'm going to ask Rory a couple of things. Well, so we're getting stuff in, which is great. Yeah, fire stuff in, or whenever you want. And I've got a button here apparently which I can press and will bring up any questions you might have. So as I say, I'm sure your questions will be more interesting than mine, you folk out there. So please just hit the Q&A button when you feel ready. But Rory, before we and if people want to go and get a beer, obviously, loo break.
Now's the time, or maybe in 10 minutes' time is the time.
So listen, mate, that was, I mean, that Like Father is, when I read that, when I read that in the manuscript form, I think it's an astonishing piece of work. We'll talk more about that later. But what I want to start with is just this thing about the two sections that the book's written in, that you mentioned at the start, and it's very weird because they read together perfectly, but they feel quite separate. I mean, they've got very different emotions in them, and they're introduced with two very different epigraphs. Can you just tell us sort of how it came to be that the book is constructed like that, to use crude?
Well, I mean, it began with the rule of threes, really. I wanted 3 sections. I mean, 2 doesn't feel like a very satisfying number. I mean, a portion of onion rings, if it had 2, you'd think, well, okay, technically it's a plural, but not very happy with that. And this began as 3 sections. There were 3 sections, and the third ended up, and the poems sort of naturally sorted themselves into those those 3 sections. And the first one really revolves around, I guess, work. I mean, the first one as it is now, the idea to switch the sections was not initially mine, though I didn't resist it. I think it's a very good one. And decided, yeah, I would do that. But the first one revolves around ideas of work and what that means. And every poem has a kind of connection to the world of work and those things that tie us together in that way. The second, I guess, love and its requirement. And often those poems are more intense in the second section. There was a third section. In the third section, the poems naturally seemed to fit into the other 2 sections, and some of them weren't strong enough to make it. Yeah. And the first person who alerted me to breaking it down from 3 sections to 2 was one of the 4 people who read this. There were 4 people who read it at different points of manuscript. Nick Friedman, who reads, he's a great poet, American poet, who we've always shared poems and built a really strong friendship out of knocking 10 bells out of each other's work. And Anjana Chauhan, who's a lecturer in Shakespeare studies, yourself, and Alan Jenkins. And Alan suggested that the third section probably should go. I was feeling that already, but he certainly helped me resolve that. So I ended up with 2 sections balancing each other out, both looking at things that tie us, things that are central to who we are normally, work or getting it or having it or keeping it or struggling through it or whatever, and love and wanting it, the love that we want to give.
Can I say something? Stop that. We've got a question. We've got a couple of questions actually. Good Lord. My Lord, there they go. I'm going to ask you a couple of those in a minute, but I want to come back to you straight away and just something I'm really interested in. And it's quite, it's a sort of, it might be a really irritating question, this, so obviously I'm going to ask you.
I'll just tell you I don't want it then.
No, exactly. No, but listen, I just want to talk about your process actually, because it interests me that, sometimes when if we're having, if we're out and you might say, I've been working on a poem or what, do you set out, to what extent are you working towards a collection of poetry? To what extent is any poet, perhaps you can only speak for yourself, surely, but in the sense that you talk about the sections and how this particular new collection evolved, but in the case of the sort of work that I do and that we do, it's very much right. Now, the next thing I'm going to write is going to be about X, and I'm going to write a script. Now, and I think that this is such a. I love this collection, and it feels, as I said to you, yeah, to what extent has this evolved quite naturally, or have you put it together with a sort of sense of that overview?
Okay, so when I suppose when I was working on my first collection, I didn't know I was working on my first collection. I'd send a poem off to Smelly Fudge magazine from Stockport, issue 1, and they took it, and I'd think, wow, I'm a poet. I had no idea I was working on a collection. And then of course you do. There'll probably be a book at the end of it. Quite early on in the process here, I knew that I wanted to organise it into these sections, things that were really, I thought, important, things that glue us to aspects of life. And so I knew that. In terms of the poems themselves, no, not at all. I can't decide what I'm going to write in advance. It just doesn't work like that for me. I can have some vague ideas about things I really want to focus on, but yeah, I mean, I once took on a commission and had to scrap it. I just can't. I can't work like. I couldn't do what you do. I couldn't do what you do for numerous reasons, but that is one of them. So no, there's nothing like that. Normally, I'm thinking about something else, or typically, if I'm very, very busy, I'll end up suddenly getting an idea for something, a line, something will just come into my head, and then it won't leave me alone till I've finished. And I think that's probably quite common.
Yeah, and presumably, as a poet, you're working in such a way anyway that that like all of us, you're breathing the air around you at any given time, and as you go through stages of your life, or as you create coherence out of the day to day, you're writing those poems, and when you put them together, they have a kind of meta arc to it. Because this collection, Sweet Nothings, feels of all your work. It just feels like it kind of really grows it just has a wonderful momentum to it.
Thank you. I had real obsessions. I mean, there's a kind of a tendency now for collections that all sort of coalesce around an idea, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of poets are academics, and the research excellence framework puts pressure on them and makes them have to pretend that what they do is actually research. I didn't have anything like that in mind. I really didn't, but there were sets of obsessions I had. I mean, there always are, but they tended to coalesce this time for various personal reasons,
Yeah, sure.
And I think that narrowed the focus in those ways a bit, I think, or concentrated the focus, I hope.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions here that have been sent in that are brilliant, and this is early doors, and people can't have had a lot to drink yet, so we can only think they'll get even better and better. But this is, Richard Robbins has said, is in my imagination, are you incorporating a lot more dialogue in these newer poems? And if so, what new dimensions and possibilities does this add to your work? Do you feel there's more dialogue?
God, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Hi, Richard, all the way from Minnesota, I think. Hang on, is that right? I've got that wrong. Somewhere, in the middle of the US somewhere. Hello. Yeah, I suppose there is more dialogue. I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, there are numerous examples of dialogue in some of the other collections as well, especially in Sarajevo Roses. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know what possibilities it opens up. Apart from, I suppose, I'm very interested in other people's voices, and at the same time, I've tended to write quite often in the first person, and in this collection, particularly quite often from very much my own perspective, which is something that I've actually been moving away from in the poems I've written subsequently. Again, not really intentionally, but I have. I suppose I'm very interested in other people's voices, and that's one way to bring them in. It's a terrible answer. Sorry, it's a very good question. I need to think about it.
Rory, can I jump back in there just quickly and just say, you do something in Like Father, and I want to apologise now to everybody out there as well who are poets and proper writers, and I'm at the other end of things, and I love poetry. But I'm going to ask questions, some of which, if anybody swoons or just throw something across the room, I apologise. But in Like Father, you do something which was really interesting, and I want you to explain it to me. And I'm going to do this now, where it seems it was you talking about the, focus and writing in the first person. But you do something in that where you go in 1, 2, 3, 4, in the fifth stanza, all the way through you've been, that you is I, and you say, not to pine for represented on access visits and not to be beguiled, but I knew I wasn't special, that I was an anxious child. Then in the next stanza, who liked to play with marbles on his own, while Mum cooked what she sent us tidied up. And it's really weird because it's like a dramatist suddenly shifting perspective at that point. Can you tell us what you're doing there?
You've got it. So in that poem, I guess with the form of it as well, I'm constantly trying to pull things up short with that regular Kurtel line on a rhyme, A, B, C, B, but then a dimeter, not pentameter. And there are echoes between how the poem describes a person's words or actions than the other person. So there's a kind of call and response across the generations. So and this is it then, and that was that, sort of echoes the 11 plus things that sort of signal points of connection. Yeah. But him, I used him, the third person male pronoun to refer to both the speaker and the subject at different points in the poem. So in that long clause, I guess, and it's the only, I think as I remember, I'm remembering my way back now, but I think it's the only monster length sentence in the whole poem, really. And there's a kind of switch between putting the poem in the third person, then the speaker, then it switches back again at a point where I don't think a reader's likely to consciously notice, because even though it's grammatically wrong, it sounds colloquially right. Yeah. That's what I want anyway. And I did all these different things because the poem's Like Father. It's a poem about confluence, or apparent confluence, as well as separation, right? And I don't necessarily think that people consciously notice these things when they read a poem, if you get it right. You did, so maybe I didn't. But they might hopefully subconsciously register them or something like that,
Yeah, it's really wonderful. We'll take one more now, and then let's hear some more because they're so wonderful. But Anthony Kalashu says, can Rory talk a little bit about the tension between violence as a subject and poetic reflection as a way to explore that subject? Because some of the poems are incredibly shocking, and as they ought to be, and rightly shocking. Can you talk to us about the tension between violence as a subject and poetic reflection as a way to explore it?
Christ, that is a great question. But again, I suppose in a lot of I always have been. There was a poem in my first book, a really short one, about a lake where a rape had occurred, and it's really about the beauty of the lake. I guess it's a very short poem. I don't know how to say anything that isn't remarkably trite, but we do inhabit an incredibly violent world where we don't see most of that violence, experience hardly any of it, and when we do, it shocks us to our core. In the poems there are some, Lever's balls, for example. There's a kind of violence to the language. There's that's a joke, really, I suppose. But the idea that is an appropriate thing to play at the end of a night. Of course, that's when the 18, 19-year-olds in leather and fishnets are busy trying to neck with each other before they go home. So that juxtaposition's kind of used humorously there, but there's some sort of I guess, some sort of shocking language. There's one poem in here where there's the word cunt, excuse my Anglo-Saxon, on a wall, and it serves as a kind of reminder about how the speaker might feel about himself at that particular point. Yeah, I suppose I'm drawn to the light and the dark, but so are most of the poets I like, you know. So are most of the artists I like. So are you.
Yeah, but I think
very much so.
I think what's interesting though, Rory, is that thing about, I remember years ago getting into a real spat with the film censors about a certificate on something that I'd written, and being told that this incredibly violent film had got a PG certificate or something because it was comic book violence, and that you know, and I remember thinking, but the point is, when you get smacked in the face, you don't spring back up again, and I think in your work, what's really interesting. It just particularly because so often it comes, it's slightly off camera, you know, like it's through a gap in a door, or it's a child recognizing, you know, and so that when the violence does come, that the imagery that you're using very often is sort of advanced, not quite seen, and it's not comic book.
So that's I mean, you know, I'm trying to, I suppose with that poem, there's lots of beauty in that poem too. There's nothing beautiful about watching a man punch a woman in the face while leathered, you know, but it happens while the pageantry of everything else is going on.
Yeah.
And also that there are other, I mean, there's nothing funny about that poem, I hope. But in some others, something like Lever's Balls and various other poems in the collection, I suppose in a sense, like I'm nothing like him, and it feels like a very highfalutin reference to compare to my own work. But one of the things that struck me when I was a student, I was reading Samuel Beckett for the first time, and I became obsessed with Beckett, was that he perfectly understood and encapsulated how things don't stop being funny just because they're horrible. And even in something, is it Vladimir or Estragon, the one who's got a hernia, so he has to press his groin. You know, he has to press his groin to suppress his laughter, because if he laughs, his privates hurt. And you're watching a man struggle and fall apart, you know, and it's funny.
Yeah.
And things don't stop being funny because they're tragic, or tragic because they're funny, I suppose. And I don't believe in those neat separations. Well, it depends on the context.
Yeah, sure. Now listen, do you want to? So I'm looking at the time as the actually running this.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Do you want to read some more for us? I'm sorry to everybody.
Sure.
I've got keep the questions coming, and I'll get through more of them when we listen to Rory a bit more, because they are terrific. And I'm sorry, because we always end up gossiping, don't we?
I'll share the screen.
Okay, so listen, Rory, back to you, mate, and
Thank you.
Please read some more.
Okay. So now share screen. Okay. So reaping. I grew up about 3 miles from the end of the runway of RAF Waddington, which is now one of the places from which drone warfare is conducted. The poem begins with an epigraph, and it's quite frightening, I think. Reaping. We need to test harder whether we can take a young 18 or 19-year-old out of their PlayStation bedroom and put them into a reaper cabin and say, right, you have never flown an aircraft before. That does not matter. You can operate this. Air Marshal Greg Bagwell. 18 or 19. What was I doing then? Well, one day I biked here to RAF Waddington's viewing point from where I saw no action, called by the urgent tornadoes which had skimmed our village, shocking pliant heads at intervals of my childhood, and must have come from somewhere. Runway approach lights have switched on and point skyward at nothing coming in. A pigeon, a slip of moon. A screech owl would be too apposite, but I saw one once a mile from here on Bloxholm Lane. It stalled a moment, then beat on past the hedges, tall as houses, living its purpose suddenly beyond range. And who knows what they do in a concreted cube 200 yards behind wires and warning signs, or who does it, or why, an inch from where it would have died, a sandfly fills its nest. Grasses by the road dip like a million rods to a million tiny catches. A saloon half a mile off indicates only to the clouding dusk, slows to corner the perimeter on a red route B road to home. Nothing to do but follow at a generous distance. Ooh, University of Life. So I'm going to read a 4-part sequence about summer jobs at university. Poems aren't necessarily any truer than novels, obviously, but this one is. Most of it is easy to follow, I think. But part 4, which is about giving a presentation at university, draws on Philip Larkin's poem Reasons for Attendance, or at least has some quotations from that poem, and the colourful one from Lord Rochester. The whole sequence is full of allusions to novels and plays and things that you might study on an English degree at university. Some a little inappropriately applied, maybe you'll spot some of them. University of Life, June to October 2013. You see, in this country are a number of youths who do not like to work, and the college is an excellent place for them. L. Frank Baum, Ozma of Oz. 1. Salad days. You had to get a job to get your fun. I blocked out half that summer, left half free. But where to start? Go to an agency, Mum said, irritated. Like your pals. Pals? I worked the show for NCP, pointing lines of cars across a field, collected my hourly rate of pay from each and daydreamed as I guided 2 strips, then 3, back to back to back. I missed day 2. And next week at the salad factory, cutting peppers into and peppers into, hair netted in a fridge the size of a hanger, I daydreamed as I prepped, slice, bang out seeds, push halves into the cold incessant course of bobbing pepper boats, repeat, repeat. Then slashed a lagging thumb with so much force they sent me to first aid, where I felt ill and got shown to a small room where I bled into a bandage beneath a clicking clock, a slight wound smiling sadly on a bed. 2. Then removals. My prize was backpacking, still weeks away. Each morning the depot filled with pliant men grew hot with sweat, farts, smoke, and Nescafe. And yes, I wish that what I had to say was, they were great, I fitted in as well. I came from a council house. But anyway, civics, gaffer, I learned the words that work, and how to say nout, when Ivan leaned from the cab, yelled, "All right, darling," then muttered, it's a blurk. I scowled to fit in with the younger ones. The days dragged, cut by breaks to read the Sun, back in the cab to keep out of the sun. I was only agency, and of course they knew. Glazer from Glasgow, ex-hooligan Atkins Diet Daz, cornered me at break, asked, "What do you do?" "English degree in that," I said, putting on Lincoln. "Colonel," went Daz, now fine-tuning a rollie for Glazer, then one for himself. We didn't speak again. Later that day, heaving boxfuls of paperbacks, desk chairs, or bubble-wrapped frames, we half-locked eyes, raised brows. Then, finished early, I stood in the back, runt of that litter, all the way to the depot past Ragby, behind the upturned tail lift, like a horse, watching the tape of road rewind before me. 3. Cold calling. I'd just discovered Larkin's droll precision, which meant too much. I lived with indecisions. The day my mate got sacked for going off script. Do you want any windows? Nah. Okay, thanks. Bye. I started on in-stores, learning to target grannies. With talk of I started on in-stores, learning to target grannies. With talk of soffits, wood effect, safety lights, the cost of wasted heat, 0% APR, and other things I hadn't known were things until I was self-employed and on commission in the doors of Asda. Red Bull gave me wings and strings of knockbacks kept me on the ground. Best ignore, said Pat, our head of team, who spunked his earnings on watches, phones and cars and weekend clubbing. Living a sort of dream I couldn't share and learned I could have shared, if only I had cared or hadn't cared. 4 presidents. If no one has misjudged himself or lied, that's how it ends. And note the full stop. There, I jab at it. He sections off the truth, and that's because he's really more aware. The less deceived. Pause. Thanks for listening. A peal of small, dry claps ekes to a stop before I found my seat. Thank you, Rory. Now it's Lynette Johnson Cox on queering Dobby in Rowling's Harry Potter. I know it didn't go well, that Dr. Pank is less deceived than anyone else in here, that I misjudged myself, that in row 8 and sitting on her hands and pencil-skirted legs a helix, eyes averted, Kate was not impressed. She whispers to her mate as Lynette mumbles into her quivering notes and Pank looks on encouragingly. One day, I'd like to do her job, but no, I won't. Then Cy presents on Rochester, just to say, her hand, her foot, her very looks a cunt. That T a public schoolboy's confident click, and Kate is giggling now. I've got a girlfriend, of course I have, but she's in Lampeter doing nursing. I'll call her when this ends, to share I love yous, as Kate and Cy share a beer. Okay, so for my second collection, Sarajevo Roses, I invented an academic who works in a university called Dr. Bob Pintle, and I wrote a poem that was a day in his life. And I mainly did this for the entertainment of my friend and confidant, Andrew Taylor. But I thought he might have a life. Sorry, that is Pintle might have a life. I think Andrew's definitely got a life. I hope so. But I thought Pintle might have a life beyond that book, and he's back again in this one. In Sarajevo Roses, my second collection, he's a lecturer in creativity, but he's been promoted now. Stranger things happen, I promise. And his job title has changed a bit. He works at Peterborough University, and I decided he should work at Peterborough University because it doesn't exist. But then a couple of years ago, I learned that there is in fact a place called University Centre Peterborough. But anyway, he doesn't work at University Centre Peterborough, he works at Peterborough University, and any similarities to University Centre Peterborough or any other institution you might know or work in are of course entirely coincidental. There are 4 poems about him in the new book, and this one's this one's an email exchange between him and his line manager. Reapplication. For the attention of Dr. Bob Pintle, Senior Lecturer in Professional Creativity, Peterborough University. Dear Robert, the board regrets to inform several colleagues, including you, that your recent sabbatical applications will not go forward after review. The panel felt that write some poems I haven't yet written, so it's absurd to say much else, lacked requisite rigour. We do ask for no more than 2,000 words, but suitable answers require something close. We advise you attend our Winning Support for Sabbaticals workshop when places are open. There are none at present. We'll advertise more when we secure funding. To raise an objection, write to your sub-dean of sub-research. State your grounds for appeal in accordance with Guideline 1162, Staff Handbook, page 8. Ensure your 4-star ref output agreement and book contract are both attached to the email, with endorsements from 2 student reps and your mentor, and a piece of your heart. Should your first appeal fail, we invite fresh applications each year, though from March 2020, all will be screened for written support from lead industry partners linked to our strategy goals. We are keen to support your research. We value team players and wish you every success going forward. Lastly, I'm pleased on a personal note to congratulate you on your teaching award, Bronze. Our faculty press team will write a blog post next week and request you take part in our new poster ad. So congratulations. Yours, Dr. Jim Jones, Dean, School of Arts. Re-application for the attention of Dr. Jim Jones, Dean of Arts, Peterborough University. Hi, Jim, Bob Pex, then deletes. Dear Jim, oh yes, I'll write with that. Those sabbaticals, who got them? And have those colleagues had 13 precious years on what you term the front line? Anyway, cheers. When I find time, I'll thank you in a poem and place it in the fucking TLS. I see you proclaim in your email signature line you're often abroad and send out of hours emails, but rarely expect instant replies to them. Well, Jim, tonight I mark till 10 p.m. Rhetoric essays. I'd give your email a fail, you shite backfilled and heaving cliché mine. On a personal note, how are the kids, you knob? See much of them? Does Nanny wipe their arses? And what are the call girls like out in Guangdong? He sighs, holds backspace till all his work is gone. The cursor blinks along with his catharsis, and he stabs, Dear Jim, that's excellent. Thanks, Bob. Okay. So I've got 2 more that I'm going to read. Oh, by the way, I'd like to point out, and I really do mean this, that my own line manager has logged in tonight, and she's lovely. And I'm very glad I don't work at Peterborough University, though I know some people who do. That's the legal disclaimer. Garlic. This poem's in 2 parts. 1, Wimbledon men's final 1994. His winners were yours, the future flung off, flung off, flung off, like the lines of rain from your balding Slazenger ball, when it clipped each puddle you'd airbrushed from your mind. Yes, you were Nothingtown, Lincolnshire's swarthy Yank, every diamond hole in the fence an imagined face, where this court gave over to weeds here and there, until the asphalt is ruts and runnels of weed, and that's when you return. No scuffed racket over your shoulder, and no one to plonk back your sliced backhands. It's been, 20 years since you were last here with nothing to show but the bluster you'd never felt? 1 dead net post remains, its crank handle jammed with rust, the fattened threads shining freshly after you butt it with a palm. You can name the bindweed now, but don't have to live with it. What else to do but know you needn't have come, that it might repeat on you like garlic. It might repeat on you. Garlic, she play screams. And Christ, it's been less than a year since she'd never known it. And now she wants pesto to dribble on pizzas, the frontier's woman pleasure of knowing we made this, as it turns to rot in a back-of-shelf Kilner jar this winter. She's already ripping the waxy green ears from their stems, feeding them into a bag, playing gleaner. but she has made you the gleaner, hasn't she? This warmth comes and goes like a nuzzly cat. You bend and detach a buoyant flower head and nibble off budding flowers like they're red currants. A woodpecker's nutting his way home in salvos somewhere, and when she asks what it is, you mustn't laugh. She's irritated now, back palming a hip, staring across this edible lawn. Why aren't you helping? So you start, swift at each clump, gladly nudged back to the instant as she knows to see it, in this acre of woodpecker echoes, making a job where he has his. And now I'm laughing. Thanks ever so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to trying to answer a few more questions. Nottingham Nocturne. Another Friday night. A mile or so away, a boy will be watching chunks of kebab dribble, mouth to paving, down a pissy alley. He doesn't know we've all been him, and it wouldn't help. Some are working night shifts. Some are alone. Always more are cocooned indoors, at least until daybreak. And you are restless beside rest, beside recharging, remouldering desires, as the sycamore heaves in the lamplight. Do not pretend you have done all you could for anyone. And try not to breathe too loud. And listen as she snores rabbit snores against you, and rainbursts crackle on glass. Never stop listening. Thank you. I'm going to stop the share.
That was wonderful, mate. Well done. Really wonderful.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Beautifully read. We've got plenty of questions already. If anybody has got any more they want to send in, please do. I'll get through a few more of them. That last poem is quite interesting, Rory, because on the rear of the book, it says, "Sweet Nothings is about absences, how they tempt us, and sometimes what they make us do," which I think is very true. But one of the things I most felt when I first read the collection was it was sort of about yearning and that sort of juxtaposing of longing and experience. And so many of the poems in the book, they seem to sort of major on that kind of. And I suppose what's interesting for me reading it, you talked earlier about the sort of the it's not confessional. I don't think it's kind of confessional poetry as such, but I think you'd agree that you go very close to home, I think, in this collection.
Yeah, I do in this one more than ever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it feels like that. But what's interesting for me is that that there is it's quite a lot of the times quite difficult, but there is still there's still a beat of optimism for kind of hope over experience. Do you think that? Do you feel that? I mean, when you finished this collection, did you feel sort of that there'd been a kind of a cathartic? Was there any kind of cathartic process for you going on?
Yeah, absolutely. When you lose hope, you die, don't you? You might as well. When you really lose it. I don't know. I've never done it. I've never lost hope, Yeah, I suppose there is quite a lot of hope in there. An understanding that things might come right. I mean, I had a difficult period a couple of years ago. There's no doubt about it. And so I ended up writing about myself and about that more than ever on a few fronts. I did, and yeah, things have kind of worked themselves out. But yeah, so there's a certain solipsism there. But yeah, I mean, partly how I try and work out what I think is to write about it. Yeah. And again, there's nothing unusual about that. But and I think with my second collection, Sarajevo Roses, is far less personal. And I think one of the reasons for that it wasn't, on some level, I wanted it to be very different to the first, which was a kind of mishmash of things that I'd written, not knowing I was writing anything that might become a book, like a lot of first books, I suppose. And I suppose there are themes there, but only in that sense. And in the second book, I was taking myself out of the frame a lot more by comparison. And I suppose one of the reasons for that now, it dawns on me now, is probably because I was coming to terms with how I felt about my my life and what I might need to do about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to confront that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not entirely sure that's true, but I think it probably is.
It's interesting. Pete Green's actually written in, Rory, and he said Sarajevo Roses seems very grounded in the relationships between feeling and place, or event and place. And he says, is that an approach that continues in Sweet Nothings, or is the new book more concerned with person than location? And I think from what you're saying there, it certainly reflects a shift, doesn't it?
I think it is, but it goes back to, was it Richard Robbins's question before when he asked about dialogue? And I suppose that there is a lot of interest in other people in Sarajevo Roses, and people in that sense. But yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, yes, Sarajevo Roses is very sort of grounded in other places, but those places are often quite shaken. I generally kind of loathe what you might call travel poems. Most of them I think are absolute rubbish. I don't care where someone went on holiday. I'm not interested in them, and I don't expect a reader to be interested in me. If these poems were just, even though a lot of them are very personal, if they were just diary entries for me, they might serve a function. They might serve in many ways the same function, but they wouldn't be worth sharing, would they? I mean, I'm not saying they are, but I want to write for other people. I mean, I don't think I'm that interesting myself, not personally, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting. Sorry,
don't agree with that.
No. I'm not being sagely, mate. Don't mention sage in this day and age. No, but Gwyn Harris similar to saying, also saying, detecting quite a change in the tenor. We talked about some of the tension in your writing, by which I mean the dynamics of your reflective narrative. I sense here too that you're challenging any previous hesitancy to explore the personal. But I mean, I think that you right, as I said, I mean, I'm not sure there was a conscious decision not to in the past, was there?
No, not really. And I think I'm probably moving away from that now. Like I say, I can't decide what I write about, but I certainly wouldn't want to write the same book again. I don't want to write, those poets who, as they go through, you think, well, I've read all this before, they did that in their first book or their second book or whatever. They're just not doing it as well now. I don't want to be that, but I don't consciously want to try and be different from myself all the time either. But I feel like, in a sense, I got a lot of things out that I wanted to get out in that collection, and it began in a time of upheaval and ended in a time of, in most ways, genuine happiness. So I feel like it's its own thing, and I'm keen on something else now, as poets often are. Can
I jump straight back in just to say one thing, and just because I'm interested, this is sort of just occurs to me. To what extent? I mean, are you ever, if something is particularly well received, and I'm only thinking of my own shameful tendency to do this. If something is well received, I mean, are you ever tempted to sort of go, just from the point of view of it being popular with an audience? Are you conscious of your audience, or are you essentially writing for yourself?
I'm totally conscious of an audience in the sense that I don't want to write poems that don't connect. I want them to connect.
Sure.
Which doesn't mean that I'm afraid of being personal, obviously, or sort of writing from a first-person perspective that may be quite close to my own, or may indeed be mine. And a lot of my favourite poets do that. I mean, try reading Douglas Dunn's poems in elegies without bursting into tears,
Yeah.
Tony Harrison's Meredithian sonnets, without being deeply affected. And you're thinking about someone else's experience, but we're all human. There's a tissue that we all stand on. I've lost track. What was the question? I'm sorry.
There's never a point where you go, as you say to yourself, they like that, the audience like that.
Oh, right.
Like more of that.
Christ, Billy, you're a screenwriter. Your Mike and Rochelle the other day, which was brilliant, has been watched by millions of people, right? I write poems, mate. I might sell, sort of several hundred copies of a book. Very few people write poems to have a mass audience. I want it to connect, but it's never going to have mass appeal in that kind of way.
Right.
Probably. Certainly, I'd be a fool to try and write for that. I couldn't do it. of course, I love it when someone really likes something. It means a lot to me because that's the ultimate aim. It's the final bit of writing, is connecting with someone. But no, I don't think about it too much at all in that sort of way. Like, I know I said earlier on that the woman in the reading it was in Burnley, and she said, "Oh, I like those ones," meaning I don't like anything you do anymore. But that's fine. I'm glad she liked those, and I didn't really write any of the poems in this book that touch on that. A few of them do, most of them don't, with anyone like that in mind. But I'm aware that those poems often do connect with people.
Yeah.
And turn some people off as well, and that's fine.
Yeah. Just one of the things also that Anja, sorry, I might not be saying that right. Anjna Chuan has said, and I think it's a wonderful point to make, that the memories in your poetry are achingly bittersweet, but I'm always struck by how you manage to inject humour into them, and which is, and obviously we've heard with Pintle and all presentations as well, and we'll come back to what else you're doing alongside the humour in a moment. But do you, and she's asking, do you go there naturally, or is that a conscious effort? Do you think poetry's too solemn and therefore you're injecting humour?
No, I think I like a lot of poets who are very funny indeed. I mean, I was reading Gavin Hewitt the other day and grinning my little face off, at various points. And not just that either, I hate the term light verse because it implies that if you're funny in poetry, Wendy Cope talked about this, and she's absolutely right. It implies that if you're funny with poetry, you can't really be meaningful as well, and and that's bollocks, like I said, things don't stop being funny just because they're awful sometimes. So.
Well, let's go back to
and I do like being funny. Of course, I like making people laugh. I like the idea that I can. I like being deadpan. I like connecting with people, and I mean the idea of someone called Lynette Johnson Cox reading a presentation on queering Dobby in Rowling's Harry Potter makes me laugh, and if that makes me a bad person, so be it. It's funny, right? To me, if it's not funny to you, that's funnier to me, so that's fine.
No, I mean, what's interesting, because I've always, I'm, as you know, a great believer in humour. I think it's an astonishing emollient, and the thing, I've said to you before, which is that the aim, I think, with any writing is argument, and that. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to surprise people, you want to pull the rug from under people, and humour is the best way very often to get them onto the rug. Now, with that in mind, and the Dr. Bob Pintle collection, which are laugh out loud funny, but they're also, we talk about they're serious as well. There is something very serious in them. Do you want to just, at the risk of
getting fired,
and all the rest, but just a little bit. I mean, but it is interesting for me though, those poems, it feels to me like there's a rage simmering not far below the surface.
I mean, you can only really satirize something properly if you understand it, right? I do work in a university, and no, I'm definitely not Pintle, thanks very much. And actually, my institution and my department are not particularly Pintle-esque either, in many ways, in all the most important ways, in my experience. But I've heard numerous horror stories. I know lots of people where very strange things have happened, and so I kind of I understand that world to some extent, and so that's where that comes from. But there are certain things that I choose to get slightly wrong, in a way that might irritate the sort of people I'd hope it would irritate. Like in one of the poem's final years, the VC has agendas for him, and one of them is a module. And of course, a VC is never going to work on a module or anything like that. But it's just there's a definite aim there.
Yeah.
But it's the neoliberalization of the of the British Academy.
Yeah, sure.
In general, and some places are dealing with the pressures from outside a little bit better than others, or have done. And this is definitely set in one that hasn't. And anyway, to be honest, it began because I wrote one of them, the Triolet one at the beginning of the Tuesday, which is the sequence in Sarajevo Roses with Pintle in it.
Yeah.
And I had this idea that he'd write a triolet, because triolets are crap, you know, most of the time. There are very few good ones. Yeah. Because you can't really say much and you haven't got much space to do it. And they repeat in such an obvious way that you kind of like, no, you've read it before, you finished it, not normally, you know. So that their form doesn't really kind of help them explore something. It's not something you can really use in a purposeful way very easily. It's just a kind of impediment, and yet sort of new formalists bash them out. So so the idea was that he'd kind of see that this is something, and they're also they're kind of ways of showing off, but it's like someone juggling two balls, right? Yeah. It's not actually very hard, you know. It's not, I don't want to watch you juggle two balls. It's boring. And so the idea was that he, you know, Pintle would wake, you know, someone, an academic at that point, I didn't really know, would kind of think, oh God, I've got to bash some stuff out because I'm going to get in trouble and refs coming up and I need to publish more of my gibberish or whatever. And he'd wake and kind of think of a triolet and try and write it, and then get bored before the end and kind of not finish it. And that was where that began. And I showed it to Andy, and going back to laughter, Andrew Taylor, and he laughed and said, do more of them. So, I mean, like, yeah, I suppose there was an encouragement there, because when someone laughs and says, do more of it, it's quite hard not to be a seal, isn't it? And go, yeah, right. Seals do that. You get the idea, right?
Yeah, yeah. And what Michael Caine said is the sequence complete now, the Pintle? Is there likely to be more of him? Do you know?
Well, he has been furloughed, even though his department wasn't furloughing people. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where he's certainly not going to get promoted again. I mean, you know, Professor Pintle's just a stretch too far, I'm afraid. I don't know. I feel like for now I've run out of steam with him, but
well, never say never.
Take the mantle. You know, you never say never. That's right. I don't know. I mean, yeah, he wasn't just meant to be a joke. He was meant to be a criticism as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And those who get Pintle, who like those who work in that world, they're generally the people who aren't like Pintle at all.
Yeah, yeah. Greggy Dowling saying I want more Pintle.
Well, Greg would be one example, right? He teaches American literature at the University of Venice. He's not Pintle, you know. He's a long way from Pintle, and I can imagine Gregory Dowling therefore liking those ones. Yeah, they're sort of targeted jokes, I guess. But
yeah, we just have a couple more questions. There's one from Kathy Galvin, and she says, the wonderful beat of iambic pentameter fills many of these poems to wonderful effect. And she said, did that particular rhythm take you to unexpected places? It's one of the things I'd also like to ask you. I mean, you write beautifully with using rhythm and rhyme schemes. And I mean, to what extent do you, what comes first? When you create a poem, no, I mean, in terms of you have an idea, you want to write something about a subject, about a person, about a thing. Do you say, I'm going to write this in iambic pentameter? This is going to be a trochee or whatever.
Well, you do once you've started and you've got the right rhythm, don't you? Because you're kind of stuck with it then if you're doing that. I guess there are probably more poems with a sort of formal constraint in this book than in the last one. Probably almost as many as in the first book. I don't like to think of myself as a formalist, but I do write a lot of poems that have a kind of formal constraint. The iambic pentameter is just such a useful line and such a flexible line, or certainly the pentameter, because when I do write formally, I tend to write accentually, but not accentually syllabically, you know?
Right.
I'm interested in the number of, you know, I want that sort of frame. But I don't need them all to be crisp iams or anything. It depends on the meter. It depends on what I'm doing. There are times when I've done that. So there's actually one of the Pintle poems, Curriculum Refresh, is in sort of a relatively intricate meter, for example, and flicking through. There are others. There's Vilnius Nocturne, where the form of the poem closes down and then comes back out in a sort of formal echo of itself, where it's kind of echoing what happens. I guess the pentameter is a line I often come back to, and there are probably more poems that are formal in that sense, or loosely formal in that sense here than that aren't. Many more actually in this book, and not so much in the poems I've written since. I don't really know what else to say about that.
Sure.
I do believe in you have to make your lines very energetic, of course. You want them to have a muscle. You know, if you can put it in prose and it works the same, then what's the point? Well, there might be a point of it as prose, but.
Final question, and then we're going to hear from Jasmine. But this is from Nigel, our friend. There are 3 nocturnes in the collection. What is there's the Nottingham Nocturne, Bratislava, and the Vilnius. Why 3? And or why not just one? And what's the idea behind a nocturne?
Well, they're all night. I mean, why 3? I mean,
they
just one. Hi, Nigel. I mean, I wrote 3 of them. I don't know.
There was no.
That's where I stopped.
You weren't drawn to the nocturne.
That's not true. I've just remembered. That's not true. There were because there were 3 sections. That's a ghost from when there were 3 sections. 2 of them fit in one, and one of them fits in the other. Actually, that's why. And I did have something in mind, and I thought about making them a sequence, but they're too fractured, too pulled apart. They're all night poems, and they all have an idea of there's a kind of attempt at love falling short in all of them, but in very different ways. I mean, love falling short, I'm not sure that accidentally staggering into a strip joint is love falling short, but there's that one. There's feeling remarkably rotten about who you are in the Vilnius Nocturne that I mentioned before. And then the final poem in the book, the last one I read, Nottingham Nocturne, which is kind of taking stock in the small hours, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, do not pretend you have done everything you could for anyone, you know? Yeah. It's important.
Okay, well, I just want to say that to wind up now, just to say, thank you, first of all, Rory, for the reading. It was beautiful and very moving.
Thanks.
And thank you for the collection. And if anybody hasn't, hasn't got a copy yet, you really should. It's a fantastic piece of work. It's a very, I keep telling Rory, I think it's a very significant piece of writing. And I think, Rory, as well, I just wanted to say that my favourite poem, and I'm going to say my favourite poem, Losers Winners, it's really interesting for me because in terms of this collection, which is so much about the messiness of life, I think, from my point of view, and that well, you know, the tendency of art to organise things, to try and make things clear, to bring, or out of chaos to bring organisation. And that poem, in terms of so much of what you've read tonight about some of the harshness that's out there in life, I just think that's an amazing. That particular poem is an extraordinary sort of evocation of falling in love, really, and you know, never. So I think it's a great collection of poetry. Thank you for reading from it, and I think Jasmine's going to come back now and just say a few words to wind up. Thanks, Rory, mate.
Thanks, Billy. Cheers.
Hi again. Yes, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to William for being such a wonderful interlocutor, and thank you, Rory, for this amazing reading. It was very cool to hear you read those poems. They were really strong, and it's always so surprising how great these virtual readings are. I would really like us all to go for a drink now, but thank you all for being here. Thank you for engaging with the chat and the Q&A. For the last time, I'm just going to add the link there for you. You can click on the link right now and you can use the code and you can buy the book, so please do Please join us for our next launch, which will be on May the 30th. We're going to be launching Evan Jones's Later Emperors with John Clegg, who you probably know from the LRB bookshop, also a Carcanet poet. We're going to post details of that launch tomorrow, so follow us on Twitter, please sign up for our newsletter and keep in touch with us. But for now, congratulations, Rory, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, William, and this has been great.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And thank you, Jasmine and Carcanet, Becky and Michael and everyone as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
What a mate. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you
Bye.
for coming.
Bye.